So today we're looking at how to make an image pop. And although this probably means slightly different things to different people, over here it really means finding a way to separate our subject from the background to create a distinction between the subject and the background, which gives the subject more impact in the image. And with the image we're looking at, this is an urban portrait shot with this very shallow depth of field. So in fact, we already have a separation in terms of focus because the subject is in focus and the background is out of focus or bokeh effect. But what could we do? Say that we wanted to go further with this, we wanted to enhance this. What kind of things could we do? So we're going to look at a few different ways of approaching this, and we're going to compare them. So let's imagine, say in the very simplest case, I decided to make a brightness contrast layer. Set my blend mode to luminosity to ensure that I don't affect color. I only want to affect luminosity here. And say that I reduce brightness and raise contrast. So I darken the background. So to about there. And then on the white mask of the adjustment layer with my black brush selected, if I begin with a moderate opacity, 50 to 60, flow 25, I can then just begin to brush onto my subject and restore the original brightness contrast values on the subject. And in a real edit, obviously, we would want to do this very carefully. Here, I'm really just trying to illustrate the principle, so I don't want to sort of go on too long with it, but so there we are. And if I switch that off, you can see the change we've made, and hopefully also that this has the effect of giving the subject more prominence in the image. And if I raise opacity again and add some more, particularly on the face, and then I want to ensure that if I do isolate the face, I want to blend that in with the rest of the image immediately around it. So because when I'm looking for distinctions between subject and background, I don't want anything that's too glaring or anything that's going to distract the viewer. And I think it's safe to say that in a really good edit, the viewer just appreciates our image and doesn't spend too much time worrying about how we actually achieved it, or doesn't see the joins, as it were, between the things we've done. So there we are. If we snapshot that and we call that BC, brightness color, and if we just switch that off for now and let's try something different. Let's try a curves adjustment layer, and once again we want to be sure to set our blend mode to luminosity so we don't change the color, and then we can experiment with our eye on the background. We can just bring that curve down to until we get to a point where we feel happy with it. And then once again, if we take our black brush, reduce opacity to begin with, and then we can restore the lost luminosity to our subject. And once again, probably do a couple of passes on this, just gradually. There's a lot to be said for building these changes up gradually rather than trying to do everything at once. This can sometimes give us a more subtle effect, which gives us the impact we want, but doesn't seem too artificial. Okay, so there's the effect using curves, and if we switch that off, when you switch it off, it often gives you a chance to spot any areas that you perhaps haven't given sufficient attention to. And of course, you can always check your mask icon, give you a good idea of the brush strokes you've made and whether you've missed an area. Okay, so that's with the curves adjustment. So let's snapshot again, and we can call that one curves. And if we just switch that one off, another way to approach this is to make a copy layer and to use exposure to create this difference between the foreground and background. So in Camera Raw Filter, I could reduce the exposure on the background. I could add more contrast. I could reduce highs, push shadows, push a little bit more black. And the Camera Raw filter gives us this whole range of options, which makes it quite attractive for this kind of thing. Although, you know, we may wish to just focus on exposure one thing at a time. But so if I press OK, run the filter. And now, because I'm on an ordinary layer, I don't have a mask, so I just need to add layer mask. And now I can, in the same fashion, selecting my black brush, I can begin to restore the exposure values of the original to the subject, so that once again I create this difference between the subject and the background. And as you can see, using exposure creates a slightly different effect, which may be what you're after, or it may not be. But the idea here is to just have a quick look at these different methods and compare them. And of course, in a real edit, I might want to work on different areas of the image. So as well as the subject generally, I might want to do something to push light into her hair. I might want to enhance her eyes. I might want to do different passes to focus on different areas. Okay, and if we switch that off, we can see the effect of what we've done, and we can make any changes that we need to. Okay, so snapshot again, and we'll call this one exposure. In addition to using luminosity to create this distinction between the subject and the background, we can also use other things. So color being a very good example. So say that I decided to add a curves layer, and here I want to set my blend mode to color, and so I can say that I decide to push some blue shadows into my background. Say I decide to balance that with a little yellow at the top, and I want to push some red shadows into the background as well. I can then do something very similar, which is to take my black brush on my white mask of my curves adjustment layer. Now I can, when I paint onto the subject, I'm restoring the original color. And I think it's important, certainly for me, to say that when you're making color adjustments, it's particularly important that they blend in, because you don't. It's too much of a sort of very abrupt distinction between areas of enhanced color and the original color of the image can look a bit sort of artificial. So. And I might decide here to drop opacity right down and just do some blending gestures around the subject as well, just to slightly reduce the effect of the color change in the immediate vicinity of the subject. And of course, as always, I can adjust the effect of my change if I think it's gone too far. And so I might reduce that to perhaps even around 50 might be sufficient there to create the effect I'm looking for. If I snapshot again and we call that, let's call that curves color. And as another variation, we can use saturation. So say that we've made our color change and we then decide to, we're going to desaturate the background to some extent. We can do that as well. And that's another way of creating this separation between the subject in the foreground and the background of the image. So now, as we're painting with our black brush, we're actually restoring the original saturation on our subject, and we've left the background somewhat desaturated. So just to illustrate that is just another possible technique that you can use to create this separation and to cause your image to pop. Okay, so, and of course there are other things we can do as well. But if we now, if we make a final snapshot and perhaps call that saturation, possibly desaturation, which is what we've done. We can then just go and review what we've done. So here's our original image. Here's the change where we just use the simple brightness and contrast adjustment. Here's the adjustment using curves. This is the one where we change the exposure of the background using the camera raw filter. Here's the one where we change the color of the background in relation to the subject. And here's we reduced opacity here considerably. And here's the one where we added desaturation on the background as a different way of creating this separation. So there we are. I hope that's interesting, and I hope you can find something in there that will help you and that you can take on board the general principle of this making the image pop by using techniques to create a difference between the subject and the background. So thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.